He has also delivered quality audits for large corporates and major industry players, as well as various SMEs, providing the right advice on financial reporting standards. Finally, Akintoye has a degree in chemical engineering from Ladoke Akintole University of Technology, Gbomosho, and he also has an MBA in oil and gas management from Aberdeen Business School, Robert Gordon University, Aberdeen, UK. He's a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, and he is registered with the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria. Ladies and gentlemen, if your hands are not too busy, let's welcome our first speaker for today, Mr. Akintoye Olawode FCA, Partner, Audit Assurance Services, KPMG, Nigeria. Sarah, we can see the applause. We are clapping for you. Thank you. You're welcome once again. The floor is yours as we listen to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Nonye, for that introduction. Thanks a lot. I appreciate. And please confirm you can hear my voice and you see my screen being shared.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. We can see you clearly. You're wearing a very fine native attire on a Friday. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks. And thank you, Chairman of the Professional Practice Committee. Thanks for that initial introduction to set the tone for today. And good morning, members of our great institutes and professionals in practice. Thanks for this opportunity to make this presentation at this session. And as the chairman had rightly said, this topic today has been well thought out by the committee because it's very relevant, in the current times. As the chairman explained, we are in the second wave of entities that are implementing internal control over financial reporting after the listed entities implemented in 2023. The second wave for all other PIEs, had already started with a number of entities providing reports on their the management assessment on the implementation of internal control over financial reporting. And as the chairman also rightly said, for us as chartered accountants, we play on two sides. We support our companies implementing, and we can also play as assurance providers as required by both the FRC and the Securities and Exchange Commission for companies to include a limited assurance report of their auditors in their annual report. So it's a very important topic, and thanks to the committee led by the head of department, Mr. Toye Fadele, my namesake, running this for members. So I have about 30 minutes. So I'll try to go through the presentation and then allow time for questions. But as Noye as I said earlier, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A tab of the Zoom platform so that we can have all the questions and then be able to take it after the session. The first part of the presentation would cover best practices for companies to consider. And I know we have another facilitator to take the other side, which will be looking at it from the perspective of practitioners like us, providing limited assurance reports on companies' internal controls over financial reporting. So I'll dive into it quickly, and it's going to be quite brief. I'll give you an introduction on internal control over financial reporting, and I'll also then deep dive into what it takes for a company to implement internal control over financial reporting, and then we'll talk about questions. By way of introduction to this topic, I think it's very good to try to reflect on why something is being done, because when we understand why it is being done, we're able to appreciate it better, and we can, apply the right level of effort in in implementing that cost. And in this first slide, what I try to do is to say, let's take a reflection. Why the need to implement internal control over financial reporting? Why do companies need to implement ICFR? After all, financial statements are always, there's a requirement for all corporate organizations to get their financial statements audited. And once those financial statements are audited, auditors' reports are issued. And those auditors' reports provide comfort to stakeholders to rely on those financial statements. So why the additional layer of implementing internal controls over financial reporting? One of the points I would like to first make is internal controls over financial reporting is an additional layer of comfort to investors because it helps to improve trust and confidence in the capital markets. Experience shows that economies that have implemented internal controls over financial reporting experienced a significant uplift in the level of confidence of stakeholders in those economies. And the implication of this is you will see a lot more, investors interested in coming in to invest in those economies because of that additional layer of assurance that investors now have on the integrity of the financial statement. So it's a very positive step that the regulators have taken, both the SEC and the FRC, ensuring that companies in Nigeria also go on this journey. Another important benefit is it mitigates risk of misstatements, errors, fraud, and non-compliances. In economies where ICFR has been implemented, you realize significant reduction in instances of material misstatements to the financial statement. You are able to mitigate errors because you have a layer before the audit that helps you mitigate errors that may go undetected. So it's a very, very positive step that has been taken, and it's important that we take it as seriously as it should be so that we can gain the benefit of, having started this journey like other economies. And, we've seen in history, very significant bankruptcy and scandals that arose as a result of lack of internal control over financial reporting. You'll recall around 2001, the Enron Corporation collapse and the steps the US SEC took immediately after that collapse by enacting a Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which is exactly similar to what we're doing in Nigeria, implementing internal controls. And that was an immediate response after a reflection of why those large corporations failed. There are many examples. Another example is the Toshiba Corporation in Japan. Exactly the same thing. Breakdown of internal controls resulted in massive fraud and it resulted into the collapse of those large corporations and loss of investor funds and loss of confidence in the economy. And the response to those is also to look at it and say, we're not just going to rely on auditors' report alone. We need corporations to implement systems of internal controls that give us assurance that the processes generating the financial statements are being done in a system of effective internal controls. It gives a lot of comfort. And that is why I feel it's very important for us to understand this background before we delve into how companies are implementing it. And just to also provide, as part of the introduction, some of the recent regulatory pronouncements in Nigeria that has necessitated us to embark on this journey. The first of it, as the chairman rightly said, the Securities and Exchange Commission, through the section 60 to 63 of the Investment and Securities Act of 2007, had mandated listed entities to implement internal controls over financial reporting. But it wasn't until the initial deadline of 2021 that companies began to take this seriously. But an assessment was done, interaction with stakeholders, with the SEC, and that deadline was shifted forward to 31 December 2023. And, Nigeria made a landmark history of ensuring that listed entities were able to implement internal control over financial reporting for their financial statements for the period ended 31 December 2023. And that regulation also required their auditors to issue limited assurance reports on the implementation of internal controls over financial reporting. Then the Financial Reporting Council latched on this opportunity and expanded the scope to extend beyond listed entities, but also to capture all entities that are classified as public interest entities as prescribed in the Financial Reporting Council Amendment Act of 2023. So, and the deadline for that was 31 December 2024. And we began to see a number of public interest entities release their annual reports, and they've also started complying with this requirement. To support this compliance, the FRC issued 2 guidelines, one for management and also for practitioners. So my presentation this morning will cover the requirements in the first guideline, which is for management, and the second session would cover, the guidelines around practitioners. And it's very important we understand the 2 sides, because if you're going to provide a limited assurance service for a company that is implementing internal controls over financial reporting, it's important to understand what they have done so that you can plan your engagement appropriately. But the other benefit is for us as members of this great institute, we have the opportunity of supporting a whole lot of companies in their implementation. So we can work as consultants in helping companies to implement internal control over financial reporting. And also where we are not providing that consulting service, we can as well work to support them to provide assurance service on the internal control over financial reporting. So we can work on both sides. And that's why the FRC had issued those guidelines. So to take it forward, and as also part of introduction, I sort of reflected, and from experience, who are the stakeholders? So when we talk about internal control over financial reporting, it will be good for us to identify the stakeholders. And at the center of this are management, because internal control is about a company. It has to be specific to the organization. So at the driving seat of implementing ICFR has to be the management of the companies. And when we talk about management, it's not just the finance team, because ICFR affects every aspect of the business: sales, production, inventory, human resources. All the different areas of the business has to be considered when we talk of implementing ICFR. Because as we know, the language of business is accounting. So when the HR person, professional, is doing his or her own work, there is always an impact in the financial statement. When the sales lead is going out to make sales, there is always an impact. At the end of the day, the sales activities has to be reflected in the financial statement. The production, when they're doing their production activities, no matter what they're doing, there has to be a reflection in the financial statement. So it's not the business of the finance, the CFO alone. It's the entire management team of an organization. That's why they are critical to a successful implementation of internal control over financial reporting. And best practices we've seen, companies that have successfully implemented ICFR are companies that set up a steering committee made up of not just finance staff, not just internal audit staff, but personnel from across the entire business, and everyone looking at all their processes and how all those processes impact on their financial statement. So that's one point I would like to make upfront. The companies that have successfully implemented ICFR did not make it a finance function activity. It was an entire management team function. The other area is internal audit. What we've seen with implementing ICFR is a number of organizations that had internal audit functions before thought, oh, there's nothing more to do. We already have internal audit. But it's not. Internal controls over financial reporting is it's a subset of what internal audit does. But because of the regulatory requirement, there needs to be a laser focus on ICFR. So what we've seen is it's not best practice when internal audit function just thinks, oh, there's nothing more for us to do. We have controls, we are testing. Yeah, there's no additional work to do when it comes to ICFR. It's not. Because when you look at a lot of internal audit plan, it's usually quite broad and it's not focused on the objectives of ICFR, because ICFR has to do with those internal controls related to financial reporting. And so what we've seen is companies that had those views had found that last minute that they don't have controls covering all the relevant areas, and they had to be running helter-skelter to remediate. So it's very important to carry along the internal audit function early in the process for an organization that has it, so that if they need to expand their scope, if they need to employ and increase their capacity, both technically and in terms of number of personnel, to be able to accommodate the additional requirement of ICFR, they can do that upfront, rather than just relying on the fact that, oh, they've always had an internal audit function and there's nothing additional for them to do when it comes to complying with these requirements. The next stakeholder I would like to talk about are the regulatory bodies. The regulatory bodies are quite critical, because, as we said, both the SEC and the FRC are at the center of ensuring that companies in Nigeria implement ICFR. And as I said, the FRC has issued guidelines for both companies and practitioners. So there's clarity in what is required to be done, and they are playing a significant role in that area. The audit committee of companies are also quite critical. The audit committee serve as a steerco, ensuring that the right things are being done. So it's important to carry them along upfront so that they are aware of what the companies are doing and they can provide their input into it. Lastly, the external auditor. And the external auditor plays two roles. One, in implementing ICFR, it's important to carry the external auditor upfront in terms of certain decisions that the companies have to make in implementing ICFR. It's important to touch base with the external auditor so that you can align on certain decision steps upfront, so that when the external auditor, as required by the regulation, is now performing its limited assurance work towards the end of the year, it's not at that point that you start identifying differences in gaps, or your materiality level is different from the materiality level that the auditor has determined. And as a result of that, the auditor is unable to conclude, or the conclusion is not a favorable conclusion around the internal controls over financial reporting. So the external auditor is also a very important stakeholder in this process and has to be involved upfront. So let's deep dive into some of the best practices that we've seen with companies implementing ICFR. And I will start with myths and realities. There is a lot we've heard, there's a lot we've seen, and quite a lot are misconceptions about what this is all about. We've seen complaints say, oh, when it comes to ICFR, it's the responsibility of the auditor. I don't have to do anything. I'll just engage a practitioner to come perform assurance and issue a report. That is not best practice. ICFR is the responsibility of companies. And that is why the way the regulation has been structured is such that the companies, the CEO and the CFO have a responsibility to include in the annual report their own certification of the internal controls or internal control over financial reporting before the auditor performs his own assurance, limited assurance work and issue a report. So it's not the auditor, it's the responsibility of management. And the auditor also has his own responsibility to review what management has done and then provide a report uh, around an assurance over the management assessment of internal controls over financial reporting. We've also heard comments around, oh, we already have management letter, and so those management letters should be sufficient. Clearly, that management letter is a completely different report compared to when it comes to report on ICOFA. We've also heard about, oh, implementing ICOFA is a fault-finding exercise, or it's just like what internal auditors do. They come around and start looking for fault. No, the objective of implementing internal control over financial reporting is an additional layer of credibility on the financial information that companies produce. It's not fault finding, and compared to an audit, it even helps to mitigate errors because when you've implemented effective controls, you can be rest assured that financial information produced through those processes will be accurate. So it's not fault finding, rather, it's a process to help mitigate misstatements, errors, fraud, and instances of non compliance in the financial reporting process. So I would use this chart to sort of provide a broad explanation of the steps a company should take in the process of implementing ICOFA. There could be different variants of these steps. Some steps can be combined. So there could be different variants of it. But for the purpose of today's session, I will use these 12 steps as the journey from ground zero to end game, which is to have both the CEO and the CFO certify their to certify the company's implementation of ICOFA in their annual report, and also for the statutory auditors to perform an independent certification. The starting point of implementing ICOFA is categorized into planning and scoping. So for every company that has to do this, and for every year they have to implement ICOFA. So it's an iterative process, but I'll use this as maybe a company doing it for the first time. You always need to start with planning and scoping. You need to take a step back and say, what are those financial statements, activities? What are those processes that are critical to my financial reporting? And as I said, this is not just a finance function activity. The finance function starts it, the finance function will champion it, but they need to collaborate with all the other players within the organization. The guys in sales, the teams in production, inventory, supply chain, human resources, all across the business. And the first point to do is to perform risk assessment of financial statement line item. So you need to take up the financial statement, the last audited financial statement, and try to understand which of those financial statement line items are critical to our business. If it's a company operating in the manufacturing sector, so I would expect financial statement line items such as property, plant, and equipment. I would expect inventories, cash and cash equivalents, loans and borrowings if they have. Those are some of those financial statement line items that would come very significant for that kind of a business. If it's a telecoms business, then I'll be thinking about, oh, they must have quite a lot of leases. So IFRS 16 leases comes to mind to say, oh, this must be a financial statement line item that is critical to my financial reporting. And once the financial statement line items are identified, Then the company goes on to say, okay, can I identify the accounts that are reported into those financial statement line items? And what are the relevant assertions? For instance, if I take property, plant, and equipment, and I ask myself, what are the relevant assertions when it comes to property, plant, and equipment? So I'm thinking about, oh, I need to be sure that my property, plant, and equipment are complete, they exist, they are accurate, I have proper ownership of those items. They've been properly valued. If there's any impairment considerations are being made on a timely basis. And I'm also interested in presentation. Am I presenting this in line with the IFRS accounting standards? What are the required disclosure requirements for a property, plant, and equipment? So those sort of assessment has to be done. And for each financial statement line item, the business has to go to the details of what are the relevant assertions. And then take it a step further. What are the processes involved that lead to me recording items in my property, plant, and equipment? So I talk about supply chain activities. I talk about the process of receiving items of property, plant, and equipment. If it's a company that self-construct, then I start thinking about activities around construction in progress, work in progress, and all of that. And all those needs to be detailed as the company go through this process. In addition, you think of IT dependencies. Which of these processes have specialized or specific IT applications? So if the business is a hotel, for instance, you'll be thinking about, okay, there's a front-end application that the reception is used to, process guests when they come to the hotel. Is that IT application critical to financial reporting? If it's critical, then that is also documented. That means we need to develop control activities around those operations. So this goes on, and as I said, it's not just the finance function sitting down in their office and trying to figure out what is critical. There needs to be interaction with all players across the organization just to have a sense of what are those important processes that lead to recording into the financial statement. And one very critical point in this chart is point 5. And in the subsequent slide, I'll spend a few minutes to speak about what is done. One of the important documentation that is produced by an organization for implementing internal control over financial reporting is what we call the risk and control matrix. And there are two aspects of the risk and control matrix. We have those control activities that are at the entity level, and we have those control activities that are at the transaction level. The way to picture this is if you look at a building, a house, there is the foundation upon which the external structure lies. The entity level controls are those controls at the foundation, and those are the foundational controls upon which all other control activities, the external building, rest. And so in implementing internal control over financial reporting, you need to look at it, first of all, at the entity level. What are the controls established at the entity level before you then go ahead and say, okay, these other control activities in revenue, these are the control activities in revenue, but they rest on the foundation. So that's the way we'll take a look at the step 5, which I'll do a brief deep dive into shortly. Then once you've identified and you've made up the risk and control matrix, then you move to step 6, which is you need to perform the test of design of those controls. In developing controls, you need to reflect on whether the control activity is effective to mitigate or detect the error or the misstatement that is contemplated. It's not all controls that are effectively designed. And I can give an example. For a manufacturing company or for a sales company, a consumer goods company that have volumes on banking transactions on a daily basis. And then they've designed a bank reconciliation statement control, but they've erroneously indicated a frequency of quarterly or even annually. Because of the volume of transactions on a daily basis, if you reflect on how effective can a bank reconciliation process be for a business that transacts millions of transactions on a daily basis, and they fix the frequency of that control to be annual or to be quarterly, it will not be effective, because by the time you're performing the bank reconciliation statement control at the end of the quarter, you have millions of transactions to reconcile, and there's no way that control can be effective. So you will, even though there's a control in place, there's a control activity in place, your conclusion will be such that those controls are not designed effectively, because the frequency is not suit for purpose. And therefore, in step 6, you will need to, document it as a gap, and then try to remediate the gap. So maybe you may have to then say, okay, let's redesign this control. Instead of doing the bank reconciliation statement control on a quarterly basis, we're going to change it to be on a monthly basis or on a weekly basis, just so that that control becomes effective. You could have a bank reconciliation statement control that requires the finance manager to review and approve. And then the finance manager is also the person that is preparing the bank reconciliation process. So already in design, you can't review and approve what you prepare. So that control will have been, ineffectively designed, and it will require some, remediation. And once you've remediated and you have, your risk and control matrix complete with controls that have been designed and implemented effectively, then you move to step 9, which is to perform the test of operating effectiveness. It's one thing to have control activity. It's another thing that those control activities are effectively designed and implemented. And it's also another thing that even though you have those controls designed and implemented effectively, that the operators of those controls are diligent enough to ensure that those controls are operating effectively. So you don't think that a control doesn't have deficiency just because you've tested the design and implementation and it's fine. No, you need to check that even though we have a bank reconciliation statement process on a monthly basis, you need to then check, how the finance officers implementing these controls on a monthly basis. So you need to check, okay, give me your control documentation for January, for February, for March, just for you to be satisfied that it's not just on paper, but indeed the finance team are, ensuring that the controls are operating effectively. And if you do have any gap or deficiency in operating effectiveness, then you go back to step 7, document the gaps and provide recommendations, and then you go to 8 to remediate those controls as well, if there's time. And finally, because control assessment is as of a period, and that's why this needs to be started upfront. Because when you start it upfront, you have the opportunity of being able to remediate controls that are deficient. But towards the end of the year, you then need to perform an evaluation and aggregation of control deficiencies. What we've seen is that there's no perfect environment. So you may have a few controls that failed here, failed there, they are deficient, and then you do not have a perfect system where all controls are all going to be effective, because businesses are also evolving. So you may have design controls in year 1, and then the company goes into some set of transactions in year 2, and those set of transactions, the controls you designed in year 1 are not able to effectively mitigate the identified risk in year 2, and therefore you have some controls failing. So those deficiencies now needs to be evaluated. And I'll go a little more deep dive into what you do when you evaluate and aggregate control deficiencies, which then will lead you first to step 11, where the CEO and the CFO issue their reports on the company's implementation of internal control over financial reporting, and also the statutory auditor. In terms of deep diving into, the step 5, as I said, there are 2 layers of control at the entity level, which is like the foundation, and then at the transaction level, which is the external edifice of a building that we see. As part of implementing ICFR in Nigeria, the regulators established that the framework that should be used is what we call the COSO framework. And the COSO framework is a short form for the Committee of Sponsoring Organization of the Tradeway Commission Framework. And that's the full meaning of COSO. And the COSO framework has 5 components: control environment, risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and lastly, monitoring activities. And under each of these components, you have principles, and in total, you have 17 principles. Under each principle, you have points of focus, and the total point of focus around the COSO framework is about 73 points of focus. And what a company needs to do is to design control activities that address all of these points of focus. So you would see that implementing ICFR is not a child's play. It's a very detailed and elaborate process that companies need to do to identify control activities addressing all the 73 points of focuses at the foundation level. We've not talked about what you then do when you get to the transaction and process level. But at the foundation level, at the entity level, control level, you need to spend time to understand the 73 points of focus and develop control activities addressing all of those points of focus. This is just an example documentation of a control addressing one of the components, in this case, the control environment, and one of the principles under control environment. In the previous slide, you will see that under control environment, we have about 5 principles. So this example addresses the control environment, but principle 1, which is the organization demonstrates a commitment to integrity and ethical values. Under this component, you have 4 points of focus. And the entity will be required to develop control activities addressing each of these points of focus. Then when you're done with this, you move to principle 2 under control environment. You do the same thing. You move to principle 3, principle 4, principle 5. Then you go to the second control component, and then you continue that way. So it's a very detailed and elaborate process that requires time and technical competence of members of the institute to support companies to do. The second aspect is then to look at the external edifice, which is the risk and control matrix at the transaction level. And this is a very detailed document. You would have to document the process, the risk statement, the financial statement assertion that risk statement is addressing, the control number, the control activity, how that control activity maps to the foundation, which is the entity level controls, the control activities, and the information you use in performing that control. So it's a very detailed and elaborate document. In some organizations, depending on the complexity of their operations, they can have up to 200 transaction level controls, 500 transaction level controls, addressing different risk points within that organization. So it's not a very simple activity. It's an activity that requires time if you want to do it well to achieve the objectives that I spoke about earlier. And this is an example of a risk and control matrix documentation for a transaction level. I just picked 3 of the headers. What is the financial statement line item, the risk of misstatement you're trying to address, and the control activity that has been developed by the company to address the risk. I'll do a deep dive into step 10. Step 10 is about evaluating an aggregation of control deficiencies. As I explained earlier, there is no perfect system. We continue to implement and improve on the system. So in a year, a company could realize that out of their 20 controls, maybe 5 or 10 of those controls were assessed to be deficient. And then they need to, evaluate and aggregate the control deficiencies. And, what is done here is to evaluate it based on the level of severity. And there are 3 levels of severity. You have those control deficiencies that result in a material weakness in the internal control environment. You could also have an assessment based on severity, and your conclusion is that it results in a significant deficiency. And lastly, you conclude that it's a control deficiency. Wherever your conclusion in the evaluation aggregation of control has an impact on the 2 reports I explained earlier. So it's very important to do an adequate assessment so that you can bucket the control deficiencies into any of these 3 categories. If the conclusion is that, there are 10 deficiencies out of my 200 controls, and those 10 deficiencies are not severe, for control deficiencies, a control deficiency in the least severe type of deficiency and represents weakness in the design or operation of internal control. But this does not require a disclosure in the auditor's report. So you could have some control deficiencies that, your classification is that these are less severe. Then you could have some that, because of their severity, you deem them to be significant, and therefore they merit attention of those charged with governance. In the earlier slide, I'd mentioned some of the key stakeholders, and one of the stakeholders is the audit committee. So as companies where you've done your implementation and there are control deficiencies, and some of them have been assessed as significant deficiencies, those have to be reported to the audit committee so that the audit committee are also aware that, okay, we don't have a perfect system, but out of our 200 controls, 10 of them failed. Out of the 10 that were deficient, 2 of those controls have been assessed to be significant, and they are aware of the remediation plan that the company is putting in place. The last category, which is material weakness, are those controls that either a single control or a combination of deficiencies that have a reasonable possibility that there is a misstatement in the company's financial statement. The controls are so material that a failure in those controls results in a material weakness in the internal control environment. And where where controls have been deemed to result in material weakness, those will be required to be reported not just to those charged with governance, but will also have be reflected in the certification by management and also in the auditor's report. So it's important to start this process on time. Nobody likes to have material weaknesses reported because it really puts a stain on the integrity of the financial statement. It doesn't give comfort that the processes generating this financial statement, even though the numbers have been corrected and there are no misstatements, when you have a material weakness, the message you're sending to stakeholders is that, hey, the processes generating my financial information contain material weaknesses. It's not the kind of situation a company wants to be. And the way to avoid this is to start the process early, so that even if you have controls that could be material weaknesses, you have enough time to remediate those controls, fix those controls before the end of the year. The reality with internal control, is that you can't correct it by audit adjustments. Once those controls are not operating effectively as of the reporting date, nothing can be done. Excuse me, there's no remediation. for audit adjustments, for audit of financial statements, if you identify an error, you can discuss it with management. If they agree, they correct it in the financial statement, everybody's happy. Nothing is reported in the financial statement. But for controls, once there are deficiencies as of the reporting date and there is no time to remediate, there's nothing that can be done, because that means for the period you're reporting upon, those controls were deficient. And therefore, if you then have material weaknesses in those controls, then it will be a very big situation for the company. So the advice is to start early so that you can have the opportunity of remediating controls. The last section is just to deep dive into step 11, which is the content of the self-certification by the CEO and the CFO. And the sort of declaration they will be making is that they will make a formal declaration that management satisfied the effectiveness of internal controls over financial reporting in the financial statement. They talk about the regulatory requirements, the purpose, the scope of assessment, and the commitment to improvement. So if control deficiencies have been identified, they indicate that management is putting in steps to remediate control deficiencies that have been identified. And they make a couple of other statements. As the faculty said, as the committee had said, we would share this presentation. So I've gone, and we cannot go on because a number of companies have now published their financial statements. So we can see example of reports that have been issued in this regard. This source is from the Dangote Cement PLC for the year ended 31 December 2024. And on this slide, you would see the certification by the group CEO on the left. In the middle, the certification by the group CFO as required by the regulation. And then on the far right, you would see the management report on the effectiveness of internal control over financial reporting. It's not easy for these top executives to put their name and their signature in a public document if the real work has not been done. And that is why for most companies, they are taking this so seriously, because you are sort of issuing an opinion as the CEO and the CFO. And you really need to be sure that the right things have been done before you come to public to put your name and your signature in the public domain. And lastly, this is an example attestation report of a practitioner. Again, the practitioner has their own responsibility, because it is not just for the company to implement. The FRC have issued guidelines for practitioners to apply to perform a limited assurance engagement to be able to issue a report on the management assessment of internal control over financial reporting. In the next session, the details of this will be taken, and I'm sure the body of work we practitioners have to do to be in a position to issue this report will be taken extensively in the second session. As I bring this to a close, I just wanted to spend a minute to speak about some of the challenges in implementing ICFR. Defining materiality is a big challenge. Recall that management is implementing and they will have determined materiality. The auditor would also come because he needs to issue an opinion. He also would determine his own materiality. So it's important that both parties are working with the same level of materiality. If management has set a higher materiality and therefore excluded some processes or financial statement line items, but the auditor is using a lower materiality and therefore expecting that certain financial line items should have been considered, then you will have a situation at the end of the day where the conclusions may not be the same thing. And that's not the kind of situation that we want to have. So it's important that those alignments happen up front. As I said, it's important to perform scoping and risk assessment. And this is not a one-time activity. For every year of implementation, the company would always need to start from the planning every year. Because, companies are dynamic. There may be certain new businesses, new transactions that the company is going into, for instance, if you have a company that has always obtained commercial loans in the past, and therefore they've designed processes around obtaining commercial loans. And recently they started obtaining, below market interest rate loan from banks like the BOI. There are certain risks that arises from obtaining below market interest rate loans. So they need to reflect at the beginning of every year what new things have happened, what new control activities should we implement to address the current realities of our business. So it's not a one-time activity, it's an annual and continuous activity that companies need to do. I've explained collaborating with external auditors, assessing IT dependencies. What we've seen is in the control matrix is a mix of manual and IT controls. So as companies begin to invest into software applications, ERPs, they need to look at, okay, how much controls do we have in our ERP that we need to leverage on as part of our internal control over financial reporting. So it's a critical element to also look at IT dependencies. And we talk about documenting and storing evidences. This is very, very important. If there's a control activity, you don't just perform the control and you don't have an evidence. Because when the auditor comes, the auditor needs evidence that those controls are operating effectively. And if a company has not set up itself to have a proper documentation and storage facility that helps to evidence implementation of controls, it may be very, very difficult for them to demonstrate that they've effectively implemented internal control over financial reporting. I will pause now. Thanks for listening, and I'll pause to see if there are any questions at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much. Okay, let's check the Q&A. I think there are some questions. Just quickly take them so that we can go on a short break. Do you have access to the Q&A?
Yes, I do. I'm going through it now.
Okay, sir.
Okay, the first question, in no particular order, is from Stanley Arodiwe, FCA. And his question is around whose report should be published in the audited financial statement with regards to the assessment of ICFR of a quoted company. Is it the report of the external auditor or the audit firm consultant solely engaged by the organization to carry out the assessment? Thank you. Okay, so the point is, the requirement is for the CEO and the CFO to include in the annual report their certification and as well as the management assessment of internal controls over financial reporting. That's the first part. Then the second part is the external practitioner that has been engaged to issue the limited assurance report on management's implementation of internal control over financial reporting. What we've seen is that the external auditor who has been engaged to audit the financial statement also plays this role of for providing the limited assurance report. So what you will see two separate reports of the external auditor, one covering the audit of the financial statements, and then the other covering their limited assurance report on management implementation of internal control over financial reporting. So those are the two reports that are included. If a firm of professional accountants have been engaged by the company to assist them in the implementation of ICFR, that consultant does not have a responsibility to provide any report in the annual report. They are just helping the CEO and the CFO to achieve their objective. And I hope that answers that question. The next question is from Balogun Olusegun. Please, is the internal control and compliance unit classified as part of management in your stakeholders classifications? Good question. What we've seen of recent is companies are establishing internal control and compliance units to help them ensure that those controls that have been implemented, all the stakeholders in the company are ensuring that those controls are operating. There's no point implementing a control and everybody goes to sleep. And then the auditor comes at the end of the year, and then you find out that all the controls are deficient. So companies, in addition to separate from their internal audit function, are creating internal control and compliance units within finance to help them continue to monitor the implementation of controls on a real-time basis. And this is part of, in my classification of stakeholders, this will be under management because they are helping management to ensure that the control environment is maintained and it's not just a one-off activity. And I hope that answers that question. Okay. Yeah, the other question I think is for the committee about whether the webinar is being recorded. From an anonymous attendee, some of the reasons why this initiative has met a lot of kickback is the feeling that it is more food for the big boys. Why can't this ICFR be integrated into statutory audit exercise? Okay, I guess the point is, as I said in the introductory paragraph, in the introductory slide, there is a lot of benefits to implementing ICFR, and economies that have implemented ICFR have seen an uplift in the investor confidence in that economy. And I think, if we go by that purpose, I think all other nuances, are not quite relevant. It's important that we see what the benefit this has. Dr. Alexander Akinduko says, it would appear that the introduction of the SOX Act in the US following the Enron debacle and the extension of similar regulation to our environment would appear to imply that the audit function does not seem to meet the public expectation in its present form. Given the seemingly increased supervision of the audit function through increased legislation and independent bodies, how do you view the audit expectation gap, widening or narrowing? Thanks for that intelligent question. As I said, audit will continue to be relevant, but implementing ICFR and all the regulations that have come with it is an additional layer of comfort and to boost investor confidence. When you audit is limited because it's historical. The transactions have been, consummated and reported before you come into audit. But when you talk about implementing internal controls over financial reporting, is at the source of the processes generating the financial statement. So they are not it's not a substitution for what the auditor does, but it's just to provide additional layer of confidence in the financial information. Now, I don't know how many more minutes I have because I know we have a second session coming up.
Just have less than 5 minutes.
Okay, so let me just use that to take a few more questions. And pardon me if I miss out any. I'm sure the faculty, the committee will spool the questions and we can provide responses to the questions. Okay, from Tinuke Adelani, can one audit firm provide 2 assurance services? I'm not so sure of this question, the direction of this question. But if the question is, can one audit firm serve as a consultant and at the same time provide limited assurance services? I would expect, because of the independence requirements as prescribed by the ISBA code for professional accountants, may not allow such audit firm to provide those 2 services because you can't provide assurance on a work that you did. So I don't know if that answers that question. In implementing ICFR, it is all about asking questions from the client and also carrying out test of controls. And in carrying its test of controls, how is it done? I think the session has responded to that. My question is, in the case control deficiencies identified and closed by management, do such deficiency needs to be reported. So if a control has been identified and remediated before the reporting period in sufficient time that you can conclude that the controls operated effectively during the period, then those have been remediated. There's no requirement to make such reporting. But you look at control deficiencies that remained unremediated as at the reporting date, and those, based on the category and the severity, they will have different impact in the report. Can an organization's internal control team conduct an assessment of internal control over financial reporting, or is it necessary to engage a consultant? Yeah, depending on the competence and the extent of work. What we've seen is some companies that have a well-established internal control function, they do it by themselves. Some do an hybrid, a mix of external consultants and internal staff, and some just do 100% handled by external consultants. So it depends on each company's specifics. Please, can we have, yeah, definitely the committee will provide the materials. Can ICFR report be issued by the auditor engaged by the company? Yes, the auditor on the financial statement can also act, to provide a limited assurance. It appears to be more efficient because, they can combine the knowledge of the audit to provide the limited assurance services. Where the external auditor is not available to discuss materiality, can materiality also be set by the company or consultant? Yes, but it's important to carry the auditor along so that you don't have differences in materiality, at the end of the day, which may render all the work and effort useless. Okay, so I think the rest of the questions I can take offline so that we don't eat into the time for the next session, which is equally very important. No, I don't know if that's fine.
That's very, very fine. Thank you so very much, sir. You did excellently well today. Thank you. Please participate. Let's appreciate our speaker for doing an excellent job today. Please, do you mind sharing your details? Probably, I don't know, it's not on your slide. So if they still have for questions, you couldn't take it. If they still have other questions, they can, send you an email or get in touch with you. Yes, participants, you can see Mr. Akintoye's picture and details on the screen. Please do also copy it and reach out to you. Thank you so very much, sir. Mr. Oye, I don't know who can help with a vote of thanks for our speaker today. We cannot just let him leave. I think my voice is too small. We call you or the chairman to help with the vote of thanks for our speaker today. Mr. Toye, are you there?
All right, thank you so much, Noe. We thank you for very good job done and the good work you are still doing. We still have the next session, so keep it up, be on standby. So, Mr. Lawode, we sincerely appreciate your time, even despite all your busy schedule. You still carve out time to make this presentation. On behalf of the Registrar Chief Executive, Dr. Larry Olasunkanmi, FCA, and on behalf of the Deputy Registrar Technical Services, Dr. Ijoma Anaso, FCA, and on behalf also the Deputy Director of Technical Education and Faculties of the Institute, Dr. Yemisi Aderokun, FCA. My name is Toye Fadele, FCA, the Head Professional Practice Department. We want to thank you so much for this insightful presentation. We cannot even pay you up to what you have delivered. We appreciate it. We are not taking it for granted. And this learnings, I believe, is going to add value to our members in practice, who are the practitioners being licensed by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, who happen to be our major target, and they are much in huge numbers among those that actually listening to you listen to your presentation today. So I believe strongly that's going to add value to them, and all this feedback, when they get to their various firms, is going to improve the quality of the services that they render to their various clients. So on that note, we say a big thank you to Mr. Akintoye Alaude, FCA, for carving out time to make this presentation. And I hope that anytime we call upon you, you will definitely consider our request, even if we cannot afford your charge out rate. Thank you so much, Mr. Alaude. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Kitoye, you did not answer his question. He said, hope you will avail us your questions, even though you cannot afford your rate.
Always, you know,
Always.
the institute is ours, and we have to do everything to make the flag flying. And
thank you. That response was very, very important.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, my HOD. Okay, participants, let's go on a short break. I think we'll be sitting down for too long. If you need to eat yourself, take water, take tea or coffee, whatever the case may be. In the next 3 minutes, please just go on a short break, a screen break, tea break, whatever break it is. And we'll be back at exactly 11:37. We need to round up to this session this weekend so that we can, for our Muslim brothers to go for their prayers. Exactly 11:37. We'll be right back to conclude for today. I'll see you all in the next 3-4 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back from that break. Whatever break you had, a screen break, tea break, lunch break, whatever break you had, you're all welcome back. We said at exactly 11:37, we'll be back to kick off on the next session. Our next speaker is very much around, and then we'll be introducing him very soon. A quick one, and for your colleagues that were not able to join in, we've sent the link of the YouTube channel to everyone's email. Do well to share it with them. Also share this on the chat box. You can just copy and send to your colleagues that are not here. So just in case they miss the first one, they can always join the next session. Yes, our next speaker is very seasoned. Like I said, we always source out for the best on subject matters as it relates to what we're treating. And the committee is doing excellently well. So our next speaker is Mr. Hassan Lawal, FCA. He's an audit quality and risk partner, Deloitte, Nigeria. He's an experienced professional with expertise in audit and assurance services, as well as financial and management matters. He enjoys working in a challenging and merit-driven work environment with opportunities to make an impact on that matter. He sees each day as an opportunity to grow and add value to clients and people within area of responsibility. He manages the audit and assurance engagement of clients operating in the consumer business industry, transport industry, and the telecommunications sector of the economy. He also manages the IFRS conversion and implementation projects for clients in consumer business industry and the financial services industry. Hassan is a partner in Deloitte, Nigeria. He's a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, a Chartered Information System Auditor, a certified public accountant, a member of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. Hassan has vast experience in auditing clients in several industries, including consumer business, financial services, telecommunication, construction, hospitality, as well as media and publication industry. So to do justice to our next topic, which is design, implementation, and operation of internal control over financial reporting best practices for statutory auditors to consider. Please join me as we welcome on the platform our next presenter, Mr. Hassan Lawal, FCA, Audit Quality and Risk Partner, Deloitte, Nigeria. Please, can we put our hands together for him as we welcome him? Mr. Hassan, you're highly welcome on the platform. Yes, our participants are giving you a round of applause. You're welcome, sir. Once again, good morning. Yeah, we can see your slide, but yet to see your face.
Okay, can you see my slide and my face now?
Yes, we can see your slide and we can also see your face. Can you adjust your screen a bit, your laptop, so we can have at least a portrait of you very well?
Okay, just 1 second. Let me do
We can
that.
see, yeah, better. We can see you now, sir.
Okay. So let me know if you can see my screen better now.
Yes, we can see your screen, sir. It's okay,
Let
sir.
me
We can see
adjust.
your screen.
I've had 2 screens, so just all right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I think we've had one paper earlier, and I think that was a good one. And thank you to everyone for being part of this. So the earlier session speaks to the responsibility of management in implementing ICFR. We call it ICFR. Now, this session will be talking about best practices for statutory auditors. Now, we know we are speaking to professionals, and I know that you sometimes play the role of supporting management, in which case the first paper will be very useful for you. And in this case, in some instances, you are the auditor who would issue the ICFR report. This is the session for you. And the good thing is that with the FRC guideline on management responsibility on ICFR, there's a whole lot of other entities that will need to report on ICFR. So some of your clients may actually have that responsibility, which you know now, and in some instances you may just discover that. And now I think we'll speak to the entities that need to report on ICFR. Okay, so we'll be covering a brief introduction to ICFR. I know the first presenter did justice to that, so I'll just touch on that and move on. We'll also be talking about differences between ICA requirements and for auditors as it relates to audits that you issue report on and the ICFR that you will now be issuing reports on. We also speak briefly about regulatory environments as it relates to ICFR, an overview of relevant sections of FRC Act, and I will speak to why that FRC Act is important in that regulation when we get to that page. Now we'll talk about the guideline on auditors' responsibility. I think that's where we'll spend much time, and then the last one, the implementation of the guideline itself. And that is where we will talk about the best practices. There are some appendices, but I think when the slide is shared, we may have access to all that. Okay. What is ICFR? Again, high level. I know the earlier presenter already spoke to this. Basically, let me put it in a very practical way. Companies do prepare financial statements, right? So what ICFR is saying is that provide an assurance that the financial statement you are preparing is reliable, and you have a process that is very clear and very good that support the preparation of the financial statement. And that means is that you are maintaining appropriate record in detail. Also that all your transactions are recorded, completeness, and that you have necessary infrastructure, maybe IT or individuals with knowledge that prepare the financial statement, and then timely detection of unauthorized acquisition, use of asset, and all those, which is more around control. So what ICFR is just saying that you need to have a process well designed by not just by management, even board. So we're talking of tone at the top, getting involved in what kind of control process do you have in place to ensure that the financial statement that is coming from your company is reliable. That is all ICFR is trying to drive home. Okay. And I think to earlier point, earlier presenter mentioned, companies have a lot to benefit in implementing ICFR, whether it's mandatory or voluntary. Okay. So when you look at the regulatory environment, you've got SEC section 60 again, that has been spoken about. Also FRC also, step in to say, yeah, since SEC can only issue guidelines to listed entities, there are entities that are public interest entities as defined by FRC Act 2023, which may not need to apply ICFR because of SEC, but FRC is saying, yes, we'll issue guideline for you. You also need to issue ICFR reports. Okay, adopt and issue ICFR reports. Okay, so, and I think that spoke to the two guidelines, which we'll talk about very briefly. There's also CAMA requirement around companies having control in place on financial preparation and all those stuff. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier that your entity may actually be a PI, and you probably just need to know. Again, public interest entities, as we know, are entities that, again, general definition around quoted and all those stuff that we know, holding public money and all those stuff. However, the FRC Act Amendment Act of 2023 expanded the scope of public interest entities. And now you have governments or government organizations, listed entities on any recognized exchange, and again, that is what SEC would normally control. You may have non-listed entities, but they are regulated. So for instance, entities that are in the telecom industry are regulated by the Nigerian Telecom Commission. Entities in the tourism, hotel, entities, even entities in sports, Nigerian Sport Council and all those stuff. As long as the entity is regulated, is a PI by the definition of FRC. And what that means is that they also need to have ICFR implemented, and issue a report. Of course, public limited companies, private companies that are holding companies of public, they are holding companies of public related companies. So the group entity is a private entity, but it has companies that are listed as subsidiaries. The FRC Act says, oh, as a private company though, you are also a PI. Okay, concession entities, government concession, privatized entities in which government retains an interest, entities engaged by any tier of government, states, local government, federal, in public works with annual contract sum of 1 billion and above. Once you have a client that is getting contract from government at any level, and the contract sum is above 1 billion naira, it is that company is a PI. FRC Act will be applicable and all that. And I think this is important because we as professionals audit all these client companies. They may not know. It's our responsibility to let them realize that. Licensees of government, all other entities with an annual turnover of 30 billion and above. If your client has a revenue over 30 billion, that entity is a PI by FRC Act. They need to be registered with FRC. There's a lot of responsibility that comes, but the one we are talking about today has to do with ICFR. So which then means that company needs to implement ICFR, issue report, and as the auditor, you also need to perform your responsibility, which we will talk about now, which you perform some reviews, and you also need to issue a report. And that is completely different from your audit reports that you issue. So I spend time on this so that you know if your client is a PI and they are not implementing ICFR, please inform them. And not wait until FRC discovers and come after them, okay? And when they come after them, they will most likely come after the auditors as well, okay? And again, there's FRC Rule 14, which requires that as auditors, we need to do some confirmation on our client and all that. And I think that's an entirely different topic. It's important for you to take note of that as professionals, okay? Now, as auditors, we know we use ISA, International Standard on Auditing, to perform our audits. I know we are all familiar with that. What is new is just the ICFR element of it. Now, it's important to know what is the requirement that is new. You've been doing audits, you've been issuing reports, so you know ISA. Now, what the major difference are, again, may not be conclusive, but I think this will really help. Control framework is very critical when you're talking about ICFR. When you're talking of audits that we used to do, the auditing standard does not require that an entity must select a particular control framework. You can do and use any control framework and all that. And in fact, you may not even rely on control, right, in your audit. However, for ICFR, the management must select a control framework. The popular one, the most popular one is COSO framework. There are also other framework, Canadian framework, and a whole lot of other frameworks. Now, the company you are auditing must select a framework and must be clear. And in fact, they need to even include it in their reports. So once they select a framework, auditors also need to audit that framework in line with we are trying to implement ICFR. So that's one difference. Another difference is about indirect control. And I think the earlier presenter spoke to that to say more like control at the top, tone at the top, to say, what do you have as a foundation before you build on it? What is the tone at the top? Do you have control around recruitment and a whole lot of other things? So those indirect control, and when you are doing audit under ISA, you may not, there's no requirement. You may just understand it and have documentation around it. However, for ICFR, management needs to have adequate entity level control in place. That is indirect control. Indirect control is about entity level control, high level control, not transaction based. Okay. So leadership, what's the tone at the top, leadership transitioning, the IT infrastructure they have, do they do meetings where they recruit and talk about how the staff could be disciplined and maintaining a sound environment, control environment and all that. So the indirect control needs to be instituted by management, your clients, and as auditors, we also need to review that. And I think the indirect control, the COSO framework, for instance, has 5 components and 17 principles. Okay, so the 5 components, and I think the earlier presenter spoke to that, so I won't spend time on that anymore. So the auditors are required to test the operating effectiveness of these components and the principles, which also form part of the overall opinion that we'll issue when we're issuing an ICFR. That's one other difference. The other difference is direct control, the one that's popular, the transaction-based control. Okay. Now, under ISA audit, you are expected to understand control that exists, risk assessment control that exists, and test D&I and test operating effectiveness if you wish to rely on the control. So it's not compulsory under ISA, but under ICFR, it is compulsory. Management need to have controls over all the assertions and the account balances in their financial statements. That is transaction-based controls. And auditors are also required to test the design of those controls, the implementation of those controls, and operating effectiveness of the control. And I'll speak to that very briefly because the nature of reports we are issuing is limited assurance reports, not and that is not this is different for what we issue in audit. All right. Now, what is important here is just to note that while it is not compulsory for you to test the design and implementation of control in ISA for all controls, in ICFR, as auditors, it's important for you to do that in order for you to issue ICFR reports. Okay. Now, also the nature of opinion is different. In audit, you issue reasonable assurance reports, while in ICFR for Nigeria, based on the FRC regulation on assurance engagement, you have to issue limited assurance. And maybe we'll talk briefly about that as we get along. But I think what is important for us to note is that the difference is in ISA, audit, you issue reasonable assurance. In ICFR, issue limited assurance report. Also, in your ISA report, there's a paragraph based on the ISA 700 description that you say that you only obtain understanding of internal control relevant to audit in order to design audit procedure and not to issue opinion on the effectiveness of the control. But now you are issuing opinion on the effectiveness of the control. Now, the opinion you are issuing may be different, may be a lower one, which is limited, not reasonable, but at least you are issuing an opinion. That one is one of the other things that is different. One other thing to note is that when you issue your reports, you are also to date that report, the ICFR report, on the same date of your audit report. And there should be a reference in your audit opinion, in your assurance opinion for ICFR, stating that you've issued audit opinion. Also in the audit, you also need to refer to that in audit opinion. So we'll see some examples of that before we close. And I think this is just to let us understand what is different in our role as statutory auditors and when we now become the auditor that also issue ICFR report. And maybe to note, to a question that was asked earlier in the earlier section. So the current SEC guidance and also the FRC guidance on ICFR in Nigeria requires that the auditor, the statutory auditor, must be the one to issue the ICFR report. So you can't have another firm to come and issue ICFR report for you. However, you may have another firm to support you in implementing ICFR as a company, but your auditor also needs to issue ICFR report. Now, there could be voluntary adoption for entities that are not SPY, and they just, a private company, Mr. Unicorn Limited, just want to enjoy the benefit of ICFR. Yeah, they can engage any professional. But if you are issuing a report in line with SEC guidance as a listed entity or FRC guidance as a PI, it needs to be your statutory auditor that will issue the report. So for companies you audit that is a PI, please ensure that you issue ICFR reports on that as well. Okay. Maybe just to also speak to some relevant section of FRC Act. The council have power to do anything relating to financial reporting. That's section 7. Section 7.2 says that requires management to assess internal control, including information system and independent and with independent attestation. Management is responsible for maintaining evidential matter, and I think the earlier presenter also mentioned that your management that's implementing ICFR need to keep the evidence. of those control implementation, and because you will need it as auditors as well. Okay. The evidence will also allow independent attestation by the third party external auditor in this case to issue their own report as well. And I think some other control, other safeguard of stakeholders' investment asset and all that. Okay. Now, the FRC regulatory framework on ICFR in Nigeria have two legs. The first one is that because they know that the SEC guidance only applies to listed entity, they also issued another guidance for management reports on internal control of financial reporting for entities that are not listed but they are PIs. And I think we already defined PI earlier. So, and that was what was discussed in the earlier session. The second one is the FRC also issued guidance for practitioners, auditors, accountants, professional accountants on assurance engagement reports on internal control over financial reporting. So if you want to implement, you want to audit and issue a report on ICFR, this is the guidance you must use. So as auditors, we need to have copies of this, okay? For auditors, this is the focus. The FRC guidance on management became effective December 2024 audit, which is this last December. The one for listed entities became effective earlier in 2023. But for non-listed PIs, it became effective this last December. So we need to take note of that. So our conversation focus will be based on the second FRC guidance. The first one has been dealt with in the earlier presentation, okay? All right. So I will try to make it practical because as professionals, and you have responsibility to review and issue ICFR report for your clients. These are the things, best practices, the things to do. Now, you do some review of some work done by your companies, by your clients already. As we said, and as earlier presented, the companies have responsibility to implement a lot of processes to show that they have ICFR, and they also need to issue reports in that regard. Okay, so the first thing you do is to review the ICFR framework the entity has. So the entity level control they have, the business process, the information system, and monitoring control. So those will be reviewed. What do you have? Ask your clients. What framework are you using? Are you using COSO framework or you are using an other than COSO framework? Now, the FRC guidance, and also said guidance says they are not mandating one specific framework. You can use COSO, you can use COCO, you can use Canadian and all those stuff. However, anyone you want to use must be able to benchmark it against COSO. So in Nigeria, most of the companies are actually using COSO. So it's okay to just discuss about COSO. So you need to understand, review all that your client has. Review significant account balances that they have and the transaction disclosure and all those stuff. So you need to review all that. So because client need to do that classification. These are key accounts we have in our financial statement, PPE, receivable, and all that. So what they've identified, you need to review it. Now, after reviewing it, you then need to obtain and document your own understanding of those classes of transaction and flow of transaction. So that is where the documentation starts for you as auditors and practitioners. So, and in doing that, you also need to say, okay, so what are their key account balances? Are they also, you then compare it with what the client has identified and all that. So after that, you perform independent risk assessment, similar to what we do for audit. Scoping exercise, similar to what we do for audit. You do quantitative, calculate your materiality. And again, as earlier mentioned, it's better when management is determining materiality, they should speak to you so that you can have some alignment. And we'll speak about how best to have alignment as well. On the materiality, you don't classify something as significant while the client is saying, no, it's not significant. So that alignment is very important, okay? Once that is done, you identify the benchmark and all that. So you then perform a walkthrough, similar to what we do in audit. So walkthrough is to say, these are the control and the processes you have. Is that what you documented? And you have the documentation, you're reading it. You then go to the people performing the activity in the company. Is this what they do? If they say they look at a particular process and then implement a control before somebody signs on something, you do a walkthrough, just pick one sample and walk through that process from the beginning to the end to be sure that, oh, okay, this process is as documented, okay? Now, once after the walkthrough, you also need to perform independent design and implementation of relevant controls. Again, the client will have done this, but you need to perform that as well. That is why it is important to let your client know that the fact that you have a consultant working with you and you've performed control design, D&I implementation, and operating effectiveness, which you call OE implementation, doesn't mean I will not have to do mine. The regulation requires that as auditors, as professionals, before I can issue ICFR reports, I also need to implement, perform this activity, okay? So this ICFR report actually increased the scope of work for us as practitioners and auditors, okay? So you need to independently do a D&I, and I will talk about factors to be considered when performing D&I later. Also, you need to test OE, operating effectiveness. I will also speak about that very briefly in subsequent slide. And after performing this process, you identify if there are control deficiencies, okay? And you then present those deficiencies to management. Say, I see deficiency here. Maybe in their own implementation, they didn't see that deficiency. In your own sample, because you select a separate sample from the sample tested by the client. Again, that is very important. The client will not come and tell you, these are the invoices we selected, go and do it. No, as auditors, it needs to be an independent work that you should do, okay? So once you do that, you get written assessment from management. Say, I noticed this deficiency. What is it about? And all those stuff. So depending on the nature of the deficiency, you issue your limited assurance reports. Again, limited assurance reports related to ICFR and the control. And for material weakness, you need to include it in your report. We'll talk about that subsequently. I think the earlier presenter also spoke to that. All right. So then after you let management know that you notice the deficiency and all that, management need to come up with the remediation plan. And then you need to review that remediation plan. And of course, also test it when you are doing your roll forward, subsequent to period end. Again, to what was mentioned earlier, it is advisable for clients to do their control testing earlier before the company year end, so that they have opportunity to remediate. Because if they do it at year end, once you cross into the new year, that remediation will not fall in anymore. So if they have a material weakness, it will end up in their report with no opportunity to remediate. So if they perform their control testing earlier, maybe by October, September, and all that, and they have control deficiency, they develop remediation plan, and you will review that as auditors or professionals, okay? And then you follow through how they implemented the remediation plan. And once that is done, and you have your ICFR report, you present it to those charged with governance, maybe audit committee or board, whoever they have, and then you conclude and issue your final limited assurance report. Once you issue that report, similar to what we do for audit, you need to obtain management representation letter. And maybe I also need to mention, as part of best practices, you also need to get a separate engagement letter for ICFR, different from the engagement letter you have for your statutory audit. Okay. Now, the next slide will be to discuss this design and implementation that I mentioned, operating effectiveness that I mentioned, also control deficiencies, and also limited assurance reports before we conclude. All right. Now, if you want to test design, similar to what the entity will have done, but similar to what we do for statutory audit, you need to assess the design of each of the controls selected for testing, and then identify the factors and test those factors, consider those factors. And these are the factors, the criteria to be considered: design factors, appropriateness of purpose of control, and its correlation to the risk. When you have a control that they said somebody reviews something and then signs off, you identify what is the risk that this control is trying to address. What is the assertion? You then say, is this control appropriate for this risk? So if the risk is that somebody can steal the assets, and somebody tell you we have a control that a document is maintained and kept in the locker, document and physical loss of asset, is that appropriate? It's not. So that means the control is not properly designed to address the risk. So in instances where you then look at the control and you see, okay, it addressed the risk truly. Okay, that's fine. All right. So you look at the appropriateness, that's design. You are testing whether the control has been appropriately designed. Okay. Then competence of the authority performing the control. The person performing the control, does the person know about this? Does he have the knowledge? For instance, you have ECL related control, that impairment assessment is done where they look at forward contract or derivatives and all that. And you have an engineer that knows nothing about accounting or knows nothing about impairment assessment, performing the control. Then you say, no, this control is not properly designed, but because it's been done by somebody that doesn't know, that doesn't have the competence to implement the control. All right. The frequency of control. So for something that is done, a process that is done every day, you now have a control that only check it once a year. That frequency is not correlating. Okay. So that means the design has failed. But for a daily activity, you expect to have daily control, or at worst maybe weekly control. Or if it's a monthly activity, it's okay to have a monthly control. If it's an annual activity, maybe account is approved once a year. I mean, you only expect the frequency to be once. So that you check the design, whether the control is properly designed to address the risk. The level of aggregation and predictability, and then criteria for investigation. So if an exception is noted, or okay, so is it something that aggregate, if it's an activity that is done and then reviewed by the board, but the company has about 4 different locations. Are they aggregating control feedback from all the 4 locations before they are considering it at the higher level? Those are some questions. When exception is noted, what is the criteria for investigation? We're saying that maybe there's a problem with the competence, and when they review, they realize, oh, there's a problem. Does that go straight to the board and say, let's change the individual doing this control? Do they investigate when exception is noted and all that? So those are the factors. They say 2 other ones which are not critical. 5 factors that you need to test as auditors for you to design the design of control. Then the implementation is easy because you just pick one sample and check whether they perform that control. When you talk of operating effectiveness, you just need to replicate the implementation in multiple times depending on the frequency of the control. All right, that's where you select samples. So if it's something they do daily, there's a table based on the guidelines you can use to say for daily, you select this number, for monthly, you select this number, for weekly, you select this number. And some things may be done weekly, but done multiple times weekly. So when you calculate it, you may end up with more than 360 days or some 360. So that's sum up to be more like daily transaction in any case. So operating effectiveness of control, you consider whether the control operates as designed, and then assess the frequency that is continuing, and they have evidence to support it. And the evidential matter is very important. If the control says that somebody reviews a particular report, and subsequently when you come to check, you see the report and you say, where is the evidence that this was reviewed? There is no either mark or a tick or a note say I've reviewed on this date. There's no evidence that that control has been implemented. It doesn't mean that it might not have been implemented, but that evidence is very important. And I think from experience, that is where we see a lot of failure in the control on the field. Companies do a lot of things that are not documented. So documentation is very important. Whatever is not documented is not done. So evidence is important. The evidential matter, please inform your client. So we'll then use the nature and the type to select sample, as I've mentioned, and test operating effectiveness. Just repeating the implementation multiple times over the period to be able to conclude. All right. So we would now just talk about deficiencies. As I've mentioned, you need to look at, okay, so once you do your report, you do your test, are there deficiencies? Also, there are some indicators of deficiency. Once you see that in your entity, you know that there are deficiencies. And I think the earlier presenter also mentioned that deficiencies are not corrected by audit journals. Once you are using audit journal to correct it, that means it's already a deficiency. You are not able to remediate as a company. Now it's the auditors that are remediating it. Okay. When you have some communication issue in an entity, the control is to be performed by somebody, and the person didn't even know that it's his or her responsibility. Okay. there are significant matters of internal control are not communicated. Employees and all that, they don't know the ethical violation, that maybe they shouldn't accept gifts from people looking for contract in that company, or they shouldn't spend too much money so that they are not alleged that they are bribing people. So they are not, information is lacking, information flow, the financial reporting misstatement due to error or data, and they are not, I mean, that means they don't have a control that helps them to prepare financial statement that is error-free, okay? And a lot of things, data-related problem, all right? So as auditors, you need to evaluate the deficiency to know the severity of that deficiency, because not all deficiencies are the same level, okay? So for you to evaluate that, you need to gather the facts. What is it about this issue? What could it lead to? Is this something that will result in maybe just 1,000 naira difference or something? Then it's not material. Or is this something that could really bring the company down? That is the magnitude of that. That's the severity of the control. Then is there any compensating control? That if this control fails, is there another control that can compensate? You evaluate all that before you conclude to say, this control is either deficiency, is just a mere deficiency, it's a significant deficiency, or material weakness. And this is important, and I think this was covered earlier as well. This is just the purpose of this is for you to know, as auditors and practitioners, how do you treat these different deficiencies? So if you observe deficiency, just a mere deficiency, we're saying control does not allow employee to do the normal stuff that he's supposed to do, but it's less severe, you know, maybe the implication is not much. You are expected to just communicate to management, the CFO and all that, guys, this thing and all that, just communicate, and that is all. However, a higher level of deficiency is a significant deficiency. It's less severe than material weakness, but it's important, and it's enough to merit the attention of those charged with governance. In that case, you need to report to those charged with governance, the board, the audit committee, when you have that significant deficiency. But once you move to material weakness, it goes beyond informing management and those charged with governance. It needs to be in your reports so that the public will see it, that there's a material weakness in the control environment of this entity. Okay, so that means there's a reasonable possibility that the material misstatement of the company annual financial statement will not be prevented or detected on a timely basis. So it's important to know that material weakness will appear in your report if you have any. All right. And I think this is just, you know, I mentioned earlier that your company will do some assessments, and you also need to be sure that you're aligning with that. So when they are doing their scoping, these are the kind of questions you ask them. What are your account balance and flow of transactions that you identify? They need to be in scope for the purpose of ICFR. Your IT environment needs to be in scope. That's what you tell your companies. Do you have automated controls? That need to be considered. There may be manual control. Their process flow documentation, they need to have it. Some companies don't have documentation. They don't have documentation for their process flow. They only know that they do things, sales move from one person to the other, and the invoice comes out. But there's no documentation for it. They need to have process flow documentation. They need to have detailed risk and control matrix. These are the risk, and these are the control matching the risk for completeness sake. Also, where there are information used in the control, all that need to be there. The risk assessment of material is relevant control, whether direct or indirect control. So when they are doing the scoping and risk assessment, you need to ask them all these questions to be sure they have all this. Now, when they get to the testing phase, early communication and two-way communication is very important. So align with them about, okay, what are the key, how do you perform your design and implementation? Are they considering all those 5 factors we discussed? And how are they implementing? Also, operating effectiveness or control. How are they doing that? What are the materiality and the sampling basis they're using? The base of the sample, and also when they test the report, how do they conclude and what is the outcome of that report? So you need to seek alignment on that. Now, before we get to the end, I think it's important to read this specifically, because you can, in the guidance on implementation of section 60 to 63, which is also in the FRC guidance on management, an auditor of a PI shall, in his audit report to the entity, issue a statement as to the existence and adequacy and effectiveness of otherwise of internal control system of the PI. A company is required to file, as part of the annual report, an attestation report of the external auditor. So you will prepare that as external auditors, and then and that audited, and also the audit report, and that report must be filed first before your audit report. So you have those two reports in the annual financial statement of the company. So the annual report must contain a statement that the external audited financial statement included in the annual report as issued an attestation. As I've mentioned earlier, in the audit report, there will be a mention that there's an ICFR report. And in the ICFR report, there will be a mention that we also perform an audit, okay? And we should report on this date, okay? I think I already mentioned this, that the report on ICFR will come, and then it must be close to your audit report. So the two need to come together. Okay. Now, this is on a sample, just to have an example of assurance report. What you will issue, because it's a limited assurance, is first to say, we have performed an assurance engagement. It's not an audit. You know, audit is different from assurance. Assurance requires less evidence. Audit requires a more detailed evidence. Okay. We performed the assurance engagement in line with all the guidance we've mentioned. And in our opinion, nothing has come to our attention. That is the difference between when we issue audit opinion, when we talk about true and fair view of the financial statement. But this one is saying nothing has come to our attention. It doesn't mean that there's something, but at least because the limited assurance report, nothing has come to our attention. If it were to be a reasonable assurance, you can't say nothing has come to your attention. You need to be affirmative on your outcome of your report. Okay, so this is how your report will look like. You need to sign the report. You need to have your FRC number. You state the FRC number of the signing person, also FRC number of your firm, because we all know you need to have that as well, the city and all that, and the date of the assurance report, which need to be the same date as the date of the audit report. Thank you so much, and I think we can open the floor for questioning now. Thank you. Over to you. Okay.
Wow, thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Yes, do we have questions? Okay. Do you have access to a Q&A?
I do have access to the I'm trying to check the chat box now.
Not the chat, the Q&A.
Okay, so let me check that.
Okay.
No.
Just give us a second. Okay, I think from
No, I don't have that. Okay, I've seen it. Okay.
Okay.
Good. All right. Questions relating to the session we just finished. Trying to. Okay. So so I'm just trying to know where to start. Can the auditor charge?
Yeah. I'm trying
11, the one that was already answered. Okay, I think materiality has been okay. So what is the relationship between the internal control? I think this has been answered. Is the auditor issuing any report to management? I think this has been answered as well. Can the auditors charge a separate bill for that? Yes, you are expected to charge a separate bill, because as I've mentioned, there's a whole lot of increase processes that need to be performed. There's increase in scope. And as I mentioned earlier as well, the fact that the company has done their own bit and tested their own control doesn't mean you shouldn't repeat your own. You can't just take the samples tested by clients. The regulation says you must independently test your own samples. Importance of numbering controls and business process. It's important to number control, because in some cases, you may not be able to copy and paste the control when you are doing your matrix. But once you have the number, it's easy to just for documentation management's sake. All right. Is the frequency of implementing any internal control should not be a key factor in considering? Yes, it should be. And I think the frequency was also part of the 5 factors of design that we discussed. Further, the work of external auditors, I think we just did that now. Okay, this other one is for the institute. Getting the slide, and the session is recorded. I think these are all. Let me just go through. Also, question about fee. I've answered that already. Difference between internal control department and risk management department in an organization. I think it's more or less based on whatever structure management wants to implement. But we know that risk management is broader, and I think internal control will be a subset of that, depending on the nature of the entity. So you have a bank, for instance, that may have financial control. They may also have control, some other form of controls and all that. So it depends on the structure the entity wants to maintain. Can we get something just like a sample or format of how ICFR should be? I think the steps that I noted there can just be extracted into a checklist format and then just implement that. I think that is actually the best way to achieve that. Okay. NGO part of PIE, well, you need to look at the NGO, whether the NGO is doing any of those things that we mentioned. If NGO is getting up to 1 billion donation or something from the client, from government, or NGO also have revenue of over 30 billion or something. I mean, I also know that there's a code of corporate governance for NGOs that the FRC is trying to finalize. I don't know whether they finalized that now. So maybe something you want to look out for and check. Internal control department perform ICFRs against using a consultant. Yes, it's not compulsory that you use a consultant. Your company, if they have competence within, they can actually implement the ICFR on their own. External auditor will not rely on, they only review what has been done by the company, whether done by internal control or done by the consultants. They are not expected to rely on the work, the conclusion reached. They need to do their own independently. Does the internal audit unit provide assurance report to know? Is the company the CEO, CFO that will need to sign that report? Give a certification and attestation. Okay, not the internal audit unit. The internal audit unit may support maybe a critical component of that implementation. I think what we expect. All right. How do we solve the challenge of disparity or alignment in materiality and scope definition between? I think I already mentioned that. It's very important that early communication, early engagement is very important. Once your client engages a consultant, they need to introduce you to that consultant, and you need to have regular check-in as the consultant design their scope of work before they determine their materiality. And if it's been done internally by the entity, as they divide the scope, identify their key account balances, and determine risk assessment, the materiality, you need to be engaging. There needs to be two-way communication. In attestation to be done, is attestation done by another firm or after the external auditor has done their own assessment? I think I mentioned that earlier to say, for the purpose of ICFR required by SEC and the FRC, which is the subject of this conversation, it needs to be done by the external auditor. However, for private companies or any company that wants to do ICFR as a voluntary adoption, they can engage anybody. It may not be your auditors. Okay. Thank you for this. I want to ask that, what is the role of internal auditor in the ICFR? Internal auditor will support the company. So if in the internal audit, they have the competence to implement the ICFR, they can go ahead. They don't need to, the company need not engage a consultant. However, it's always very good in the first year to engage a consultant because they probably have more knowledge of it because of the other clients they've been servicing. But they should work with your internal audit in the first year and your internal control team and hold them, work together and hold them so that next year you won't need the consultant again. Your internal auditor should be able to run with it going forward. But if you don't get them to hold your internal team and train your internal team, you will need them again next year. And you know you pay consultant each time you engage them. So as a company, you may want to think about that. But as practitioners, I believe we are always ready to service our clients and, of course, build them. All right. If free zone entities are also classified as PI, okay, that's a very tricky one. Free zone entities, CAMAs are not applicable, but I think we've had this question put to FRC severally. FRC's view is that as long as they meet any of the definition we talk about, they are concession companies. They may be in FRC. In free zone. There may be government-owned entities in the free zone. There may be entities having more than 30 billion in free zone. Yeah, so even though they are not expected to comply with CAMA and all the other companies act, again, I think this one is something that entities in the free zone may need to approach the FRC or probably have some engagement to determine the applicability to them, or get legal opinion. And I think it's very important. We've had companies asking this question, and they're actually obtaining legal opinion, which I believe they would interface with FRC and come up with something. Again, I would want to leave it at that. I hope we will get presentation slide. I think if ICAN will share that. The authors are to issue ICFR reports. Then what about the attestation report? So attestation is just the name that is coming up. So what is being issued is attestation by management. Okay, so or certification. So the name can be in any form. But what is important, I think, as mentioned, is that the CEO and the CFO will independently issue a certification that will certify these accounts. And then one management report on ICFR will be issued, which will be jointly signed by the MD and the CFO, sorry. So that is 2 reports on the part of management. On the part of auditors, you issue an assurance report because the FRC guidance says you should use an assurance engagement. That's why we're saying an assurance report, and you issue a limited opinion on that. Limited assurance report. Please, if a company that is a PI based on threshold of 1 billion turnover, it's 30 billion turnover, by the way, 1 billion contract with the government, okay, falls below that threshold in the subsequent year. Okay. So FRC, this question has been put forward in one session that we had while FRC was present. They said that once you become a PI, you remain a PI. So if you do a 1 billion contract with government today, and you have to register with FRC, you now do ICFR and all that. So if next year you are not able to get as much, you still continue to be a PI because another year you may get that. So again, this is something that FRC will have to clarify. And I think I've only shared a view that I've seen them express in one of our sessions. So companies in this category may want to engage FRC directly. Is that going to charge separately for? Yes, they will charge separately. Also get new engagement letter. Yes, they need to get new engagement letter. It need not be a replacement of the other one because the other one is based on a different standard, ISA, while this other one is based on assurance, limited assurance, ICRE standard. So it's better to have a separate one in order not to miss anything. Okay, that's the best practice. We are the external auditors that we also perform and give the limited ICFR assurance required. Can we also assist the company in management of the implementation? No, for a fee, you cannot. That will impair your independence. And I think in the FRC guidance, it was specifically mentioned that if you are issuing ICFR assurance report, you cannot be the consultant supporting the management again. That will be a self-review threat. You'll be reviewing what you've done. So please, it's very important to ensure that we are independent. And I think the ICAN code is also very clear on that. Okay. Can issue raised management letter replicate ICFR? Yes. So management letter is just a name. So once you have deficiencies, you report it. Whether you report the management letter or a separate report, you call it governance report, any name you call it. You have to report the ICFR deficiencies. And I think, as I've mentioned, different categories, deficiency, you report to the management. Significant deficiency, you must report to those charged with governance. That needs to go to the board. Material weakness must appear in your report that you will publish and sign. Okay. Is the 1 billion naira contract cumulative or per just one contract? In a year, I think that's what it said. So again, what is in the definition, the FRC 2023 amended, I say if you do 1 billion contract with management, it wasn't specific as to whether cumulative or per this, but because periodicity concept of accounting says you issue a report annually. So if you have up to 1 billion from government, and they said any level of government, state, local, and all that is 1 billion. So one would assume that it's cumulative in a year. But again, if more clarity is needed, I will advise that the company, if they feel strongly, can approach FRC directly. And I think the current FRC has always said they want that engagement to clarify stuff. But I think what is clear from the definition is that 1 billion contracts, whether cumulative or in one contract. That is all the questions we have. I don't know if there's any other one. Back to you. No, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hassan Lawal. Wow, you did an excellent job this morning. Please, participants, can we appreciate our speaker for today that rounded up the session? Thank you so very much. I don't think my voice is enough to give the thanks. I don't know, maybe there are still some participants that still want to ask 1 or 2 questions, but because of time, we might not be able to take all the questions because some of our Muslim brothers and sisters need to go for their prayers. However, sir, can you please share your details on the screen so that participants can reach out to you just in case they have questions and they need to ask some things that they're not very clear of. Can you share your details on the screen?
Yeah, I'll do that just now. Just 1 second.
Okay. Okay, while you're doing that, I don't think my voice is enough to say thank you, for taking out time to be with us this afternoon. Maybe I'll just call on the chairman, Professional Practice Committee. And just in case, if you don't know, that's our participant. He's a very, very senior member of the Governing Council of the Institute. And he's also the chairman of the Subcommittee on Practice Monitoring and Other Regulatory Matters, a subcommittee of Professional Practice Committee. Let's welcome Mr. Jamiu Adeyemi Olakison, SCA, to help with a vote of thanks to our speaker this afternoon. Sir, you're welcome again. Please help us with the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Noye. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I do the task you've assigned to me, I think you need to let participants know that Mr. Hassan Lawal that presented last, he is equally a member of this committee, and he is the one chairing the subcommittee on practice monitoring and other regulatory matter for this presidential year. Let me start by thanking everyone who has made this possible, the secretariat staff, and every other person who has worked behind the scenes to ensure that we're able to achieve what we achieved today. I know Mr. Akintoye Alawade, the partner from KPMG, earlier on, the HOD has appreciated him with beautiful words he said. Once again, I would like to thank you very much, Mr. Akintoye Alawade, for responding to our call at the short notice, and you were able to display that impressive performance. To Mr. Hassan Lawal, who has been supporting ICAN in different ways. Since I've been in this committee, he has always been in this committee, supporting the Institute from different angles, providing resources, reviewing the work that is done by his subcommittee, and also making his people available to ensure they support the Institute. And today he made himself available as well to do this beautiful work that he has just finished. We can't thank you enough. We know the Institute cannot reward you financially, just like for us as well, who are working for the Institute in one capacity or the other. Because of the love we have for the Institute, that is why we are doing what we are doing. And I know that is what has propelled you to do what you did this morning up to this afternoon. So we really appreciate you. We thank you very much. And we believe, since you are even a member of this committee, you will always be available to perform the role when you are called upon to do it. So we really thank you very much for this wonderful performance. Thank you. No, yeah, I don't know if there's any other thing I would like to do, but let me use this opportunity to also mention to the participants. I recognize the fact that we are limited by space on the platform that we are using. I was equally shocked when I got to know that the limit we have on Zoom platform we are using is 500, which necessitated asking some other participants to go to YouTube. We are working on ensuring that subsequently we will use platforms that can accommodate everybody. And here at a glance, we can see the number of participants. We had an event, a session on Monday, and I mentioned at that event that what we have set for ourselves as a target is to create a platform through which the Institute can interact with the members of the Institute in practice. And the session we did on Monday was all about that. And we intend to do that almost every quarter to ensure that we give that avenue to both the Institute and members in practice to interact. So this webinar we've done today is equally a gift from the Institute, from Council to members. And we will do more of this in the future to ensure that we're able to pass the knowledge across to our members. And the Institute is doing a lot to support its members, especially members in practice in this regard, in terms of ensuring that you are acquainted with everything you need to know as far as practice is concerned. So we hope to do more in the future. And let me use this opportunity to remind everybody who has not paid the subscription to the Institute to make sure you do so this week, next week, especially as the ICAN election is coming next month. You will only be in a position to vote if your name appears in the register of financial member that will be published at the end of this month. So end of this month is the deadline. In case you've not paid, please make sure you do so before the end of this month so that you have the opportunity to exercise your right as a financial member of the Institute by voting. So on this note, I want to really say thank you to all of you for the participation. We look more to your future participation in any event that we are going to organize in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you all. So Noyen, back to you so that you can do the closure.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, you've thanked us, but we also need to say thank you. Thank you, our members. We see the good work you're doing for members of the Institute, and we really, really appreciate you for it. Thank you. We can never thank you enough. As much as you keep thanking us, we'll also be saying thank you. Yes, quickly, we want to round it up for today, but let me just quickly...
Madam.
Let me just quickly announce that our deputy director joined us in the course of the training, Dr. Yemisi Adedokun. She's the deputy director, technical education and faculty. Ma, we appreciate you for joining us today. I also want to say thank you to Mr. Toye Fadeli for this opportunity to do this, and members of staff of the department as well. God bless you guys, really appreciate you. And to participants, thank you, all of you. We'll be rounding up any moment from now, but we need to take the national and ICAN anthems. So after now, it's bye-bye for now. Please stay safe.
The national and the ICAN anthem?
Yes, the national and ICAN anthem.
Okay, before that, I equally want to recognize the presence of the one of our facilitators that presented paper on Monday, Dr. Folashade Owolabi from Deloitte. So she has been with us since the beginning of this session, and we want to sincerely appreciate you, madam, for being with us. And in addition to the appreciation message from the 60th president through our chairman, Professional Practice Committee, Mr. Jamiu Adeyemi Olakison, FCA. We want to extend their greetings to you, madam, for being in attendance. And we appreciate everything you've done on this role. So to run before the national and ICAN anthem, I also want to mention that please, the deadline for our members in practice to regularize their practice license is still standing at 31st of May 2025. So we are using this opportunity to still re-echo this announcement that if you know any of our members in practice that has not regularized their practice licenses, please, they still have the opportunity to do so. After 31st of May 2025, if you have your license, either it has expired, if you have license, old untenured license that you are still practicing with, if you know anyone still practicing with old untenured license, that is those members in practice that they've not renewed their license since 2019 when the renewal started, please, this is an opportunity to assist the institute, be our ambassador outside there, to speak to them and advise them to come and do the needful before the deadline. Thereafter, they will be subjected to fresh license application processes and procedures. That is, they need to go back, irrespective of their age, irrespective of when they got the license, they will go back, retrain for another 36 months. And also, they will be required or mandated to also satisfy other requirements and extant policy as stated by the council. So the window is still open. Let them come around and regularize their license so that they will not lose it. Thank you so much, Madam Noe. You have the floor. Over to you.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Participants, you've heard it from the head of the department. Every information should be adhered to. Yes, let's now call on the technical team to please play the national and ICAN anthem as we wrap it up for today.
Let's go, ICAN fount of treasure in triumph of banner raised, standing strong
Please, we can't hear you in case you are speaking. We can't hear you. Unmute yourself to speak. Thank you.
No, we are done, sir. Participants are already leaving and they are clapping their hands. I think we're done. We wrap it up for today.
All right. Thank you.
Sir. Thank you too.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
And you too.
Have a restful weekend.
Yes, so let's have our e-lunch.
We are going to send the e-lunch.
Yeah, and e-drink.
And the e-breakfast.
Oh, God.
So that you can enjoy all the electronic version of it.
Yes, so all the electronic, yes, so it's very necessary.
Yes, please. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You are doing well. Keep it up.
Thank you, sir. And you too.
All right.